What I'd like to move to is the forum part of it, and to one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning was that all the different things that we are doing in our daily life today, I've become aware of being a whole lot more mindful in terms of, and intentional in terms of what it is I'm doing, and even just stopping and doing some of it. Still got a long way to go, but so as I think about sort of mindfulness, and also really beginning to think about, so what really is important? We aren't allowed to do a whole bunch of stuff that we normally would be doing. So it's like, well, what really is important, and how do we engage? So I've got a little exercise for you just to do it. I want you to think of somebody that you really love. And this exercise works better if they also love you. So if you think about that person that you really love, who loves you, then take a moment to remember them, and to remember a time when you really got to share love with that person. And you'll be very aware how important and valuable that love is to you. And it wouldn't be a good thing to lose it. So in your mind, in your imagination, just hold on to that love so you don't lose it. And just notice what that's like. And as you're aware of what that's like, just set that aside now. You can distract yourself, think about what you're going to do after this call or something else. Just let yourself be distracted. Sort of shake it off if you like. And as you think about, come back to that thing about what you love, just in get you to come back to that person that you really love, and this time, rather than holding on to the love, allow the love to hold on to you and the other person. So let the love hold you and the other person, and just be aware of what that is like, to be held by love. And as you're aware of being held by love, now I invite you to contrast that with holding on to love. And the first question I have for you is there a difference between holding on to love and being held by love? I'm just curious, is there a difference? And if there is a difference, what is that difference? Anyone like to share? Firstly, is there a difference, and what is the difference? Anyone like to share? You have to unmute yourself to speak.
Seems like it's a lot easier to have love hold you than to, you to be grasping for love. Yeah.
Cool. So it's easier. It's more restful. Any other?
Yeah, restful. Good word.
Any other subjective experiences? Anyone notice that it was more expansive, sort of enlarging, to be held by love than holding on to love? I see a few head nods. Any other sort of subjective experiences?
It feels like maybe there's a little bit of fear in holding on to love.
I think, Kelly, you're right. And I think I'm not sure whether it's actually a little bit or a whole lot. It depends on maybe on the person and the experience. But actually, and I would say, and it's a segue into what I say, is that the holding on to love is actually not love, it's fear in action. Because it's the bottom line is we're afraid of losing it. We don't want to do that. So, and out of that fear, we also get things like greed and envy, jealousy, all of those kinds of things that actually end up destroying love. Now, when you think about that idea of being held by love, that's part of what we say in the English language, that I'm in love. What that means to me is that somehow, and I think of my beloved Kim, for example, it's not simply that she loves me and I love her, but that together we find ourselves in a reality that's greater than both of us. And that reality is love. So as we think about that, and I think been thinking about what's really important, what we want to be able to do is to think of some of these activities that we've done, and maybe we're no longer able to do them, to think of that activity as a very temporal thing. It's something that happens in the midst of time. It's something that you do. But when it gives you a sense of satisfaction, chances are what you're experiencing there is something timeless. And I think, for example, of love being timeless. Now, a lot of the temporal things that we used to do a couple of weeks ago, we can't do. We cannot worship inside the church. So we're Zooming or streaming services, streaming and engaging like what we're doing right now, all sorts of different ways. And as we think about that, the going to church is a very temporal thing. What we need to pay attention to is what's the timeless aspect of that. I think of entering into the presence of God, being aware of love, connecting with friends, all of those different kinds of activities. And we're having to do them in different ways. I know some people are setting up an area in their house, which is their chapel, their spiritual place. It may be just a big, huge, comfy chair that you can sit and read and meditate, reflect. Maybe a place where you light a candle to remember. Now, those are all temporal things that we're doing to help us to access this timeless quality like love, connection, friendship. All of those things are actually timeless. And here's what happens to us, though, as human beings. We get connected to the temporal place or the temporal thing and confuse that with the timeless quality that's within it, or that's actually mediated to us. And ultimately, that leads to what we call idolatry. Idolatry is grasping, clutching a temporal thing that has manifested a timeless quality to me. And we hold fast to that temporal thing. And there are all sorts of ways that we can be idolatrous. For us Episcopalians, one of the classic is our prayer book. Just mess with that. And we're clinging. The prayer book is a temporal vehicle for us to know this incredible timeless grace. Another incredible example of idolatry in the church, for example, are clinging to a particular version of the scriptures. And if they change that, we can get really upset. And what we're doing there is grasping a very temporal thing. It's like there are some people who won't let go of the King James Bible. Well, that's not really the original Bible if you wanted to go back and cling to it. It was well, parts of it were in Hebrew, parts of it were Aramaic, then translated into Greek, Latin. So hymnals are another example. And I think in lots of ways our buildings, that we cling to them. I know when I was in seminary years ago, I had a big chair. In my first year, I had this big, huge, it was a junky old chair in lots of ways, but it was the chair that I meditated in at night. And the next year, my room was basically the same as I'd left it, but someone had moved out my big chair. And I was really angry and felt bereft in a way. And what I was doing there was clinging to a vehicle by which I had met or experienced this timeless grace. And that timeless grace is timeless. It's not bound to a particular thing like a chair or what have you. And so the solution to idolatry isn't to sort of wrestle away these things, buildings, statues, Bibles, prayer books, hymnals. The solution is to ponder what is the timeless grace that this temporal thing has manifested to me. And when you figure that, what that timeless grace is, to allow it to hold you. So we don't cling to that, we actually allow that to hold you. I think of the prayer book and I think of other prayers where one of the things that I experience in them is beauty. And so it's to think about beauty holding onto me or holding me rather than clutching it. And I don't think you can clutch beauty at all. But we can get really tangled up in the temporal thing that has brought beauty to us. I think of looking at a rose and just being really aware of the beauty of that flower. Maybe also the beauty of the perfume. And knowing that in a few days that rose will wither. And so it's to come back and you remember and allow yourself to be held by beauty, or whatever it is that you are thinking about. I'm also very aware that as we're gathering like this and staying connected in some ways and being separated physically from friends and family and different people. And many years ago, long before I actually went to seminary, I was saying morning prayer is part of my devotion, and I just really started doing that as a daily devotion. I got to the Lord's Prayer, and I was in my bedroom praying, and it was like I started Our Father, and I thought, no, that's wrong. There's no one else here besides me. I should be saying my Father. And then being incredibly aware that possibly right at that moment, but people all around the world are also praying the Lord's Prayer. And when Jesus taught us to pray, he didn't say my Father, he said our Father. And every time we pray that prayer, we are reminded that we are in community, even if you're on your own. And a few years back, I was up in Canada doing a conference for a group of people from small churches. It was called the Small Church, Great Church Conference. And these folks gathered on Sundays and during the week in congregations, some of them were like 10 people, 50, maybe 80 people, but they were small churches. And people from those churches had gathered, and we were doing a weekend retreat and study program. And for Sunday, we were going to have worship. That was on the schedule. And as I was planning it, and we had about 150 people at this event. So we were planning worship for 150 people. In the midst of that, I thought, no, that's really wrong. That's not right. Because that is not their lived experience. The people who are coming back together with 150 people on Sunday, and we were exploring what they were doing. And so what I decided to do was to break the groups up. And so we had groups of about 12 people, and there was the facility we were using had lots and lots of breakout rooms. It was actually an old army barracks that had been turned into a conference center. So there were lots and lots of breakout rooms in this building. And on Saturday night, people got together in groups of about a dozen, and I met with the clergy separately, but the people designed their worship, what they wanted their priests to do and what hymns they would sing and different things. And then, so the following day we got together and we all went to these separate rooms in small groups and began worshiping. And what was fascinating was, as we were maybe reading a lesson or something in one room, you could hear people in another room singing. And in another room, you'd hear people sort of maybe saying the creed, where everyone's kind of in unison and there's kind of a resonance to it. But you could hear echoes of all these other groups worshiping in different parts of their service as we were worshiping in ours. And I had a sort of a similar sense to when I was back in my room praying the Lord's Prayer. It was Our Father. And that we were somehow doing it all together, even though we're separate. And when we got back together and had a plenary session, this one lady, she said, it was kind of interesting. When we were worshiping in our room and we were reading the lesson, I could hear people singing. And she basically had the same experience as I had. And she said, what happened was that when she would worship in her little church, maybe about 20 people on a Sunday, she would feel really lonely and sort of like nobody cares, that sort of this is all, she's almost doing it on her own. And she said, what I had was this profound experience that when we gather, maybe there's only 12 of us, 20 of us, it's like, I am not alone. That there are people across my province, across the nation, across the world, who are also worshiping. Maybe not exactly at this time, but we have that sense of worshiping with the whole communion of saints, and that we enter into that timeless realm when we worship. I recorded the worship service that was streamed this morning on Thursday. And in the midst of it, it's to be aware that what we've entered into is this timeless place, this eternal place, where we are not alone, that there are people around the world and across the town doing likewise. Their words may not be exactly the same as ours. And so as we go through the coming weeks, I know I have become much more mindful of the people who are not with me physically, but who are in my heart and that I'm in their heart. And if you think about the different activities that you weren't able, you can't do, that you used to do just a couple of weeks ago, to ponder what's the timeless aspect of that activity. And to ponder then what's a new temporal way for you to engage in that timeless activity. Maybe the thing that you used to do was some form of creativity. And is there a different way for you to be creative? And maybe part of that creativity was working with color. And is there a different way for you to work with color? Behold beauty. Because the reality is that while we've been separated from these temporal things that we have enjoyed, we haven't been separated from that timeless quality. And that those temporal things were really a vehicle by which to experience the timeless quality. And we don't want to get caught in the trap of grieving the temporal thing when the timeless quality is available to us. And I'm reminded of Jesus just before the ascension. He said, "Don't cling to me." And I think what he was saying was, don't cling to this outward form of me. Allow the timeless quality of who I am and what I offer. Allow that to hold you. And so as we go through these weeks together, to be held by the timeless presence of God, by the timeless presence of our love for one another, our timeless presence of caring. Well, I'd like to open it up for some conversation if you would like, or if you need to, we've got a few minutes, if you want to refresh your coffee. So I'm open for some conversation.
Hey, Rob. So, good morning.
Hey.
Thanks for this. So I'm thinking, what comes to mind in these conversations is while we are separated, we're all held in love. And how after this separation, the sequester ends, how can we remain mindful of these thoughts? What are some things we can do to remain mindful of this mindset, heart set, once we're all back together and the distractions of the world take over again? And I don't know if that makes sense or not. It's just,
well, I think there are a couple of things, Rob, that I would I'll be fascinated to see in terms of what I notice is different, because my suspicion is a lot of the things, particularly if they go on for a while, that we will actually habituate to some new experiences. And I don't know what that, I'm hoping, for example, my mindfulness, like I think you're saying, is that my mindfulness will continue, that I will be much more aware of what is truly important, and to be more intentional about those things. So I'm just hoping some of those things will have habituated.
yeah, it makes sense.
But I think we can also it's kind of like a wake-up call in terms of really, we've got the time to ponder what truly is important, and how do we pay attention to what's important. And I know the church is often, we've often I've often preached sermons about what's important, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, sort of take a yawn and you keep on going with the craziness of your life. But then it's something like this that brings it all into focus.
This is Joseph, Rob.
Great.
Both Robs. It requires a great deal of patience with ourselves, because it seems to me that what you're talking about is detachment and conversion. And one of the things that you often will hear folks talk about in recovery work is a relapse is a part of it. And so being patient with yourself, that you're not gonna, that you're not going to hold on to everything that you have learned in this time perfectly moving forward. It's going to be a constant, it's in motion.
Well, I think that sense of patience, and patience with yourself when part of you doesn't want to do something, part of you does want to do something. It's very easy to fall into the trap of hating that part of you that won't get with the program, or that part of you that screws up, or that part of you that gets frustrated, or whatever it is that you don't like. And one of the things that I like to think of the altar as this big, huge table where we all get to sit, and that includes all the bits of me, all the parts of me. The parts of me that say wants to be a priest, and the other part of me that says, hell no, I don't want to do that. And all of those parts. And there is a place where all of those parts of me are welcomed. And to have that attitude toward every part of me. And it's the acceptance of that part of me. Often we try to get rid of those parts. And actually that just makes it worse.
Right.
And it's actually coming to that place of acceptance and knowing that, and this is why I think I find the whole gospel so important, is that knowing that no part of me is big enough to stop God loving me.
And I think the psalmist really gets at that beautifully, where, in the one instance, the psalmist is railing against God and take down the enemy, and then always ending with, and you are God.
Mm-hmm. And you will have the last word.
This is Catherine. I often during Lent, I read a wonderful book, and I'll put it in the chat, but I'm going to show it, that really speaks to these parts of ourselves. Oh, it goes backwards. Anyway, A Season for the Spirit by Martin Smith from the Society of St. John the Evangelist. So I'll put it in the chat because each of the readings welcomes us into those different parts of ourselves and how to bring ourselves into communion and healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and it's kind of crazy because we often sort of say, well, God will love me if I could get rid of this part of me that's offensive to God. And if that's your attitude, good luck.
Right.
It ain't gonna happen. Right? Because the whole gospel says that it's only in the light of God's love will you have the power to resolve whatever it is that may be offensive to God. And so the love of God is where we begin. It's not where we end. Or maybe I should say, it's not the hoped for goal. It will be the goal, but it's not the hoped for goal. It's actually the beginning and the means to itself.
The beginning and the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought to me, to also Paul's recommendation or directive to work out your salvation in your life, and exercising those muscles that need the exercise. And then I guess the first part of that is realizing that they need exercise, which is having access to the information that, hey, these areas need some help, right? Or, well, I don't know. This is good.
I would also say, though, that I think, and this is where it has to go beyond information. It has to somehow become practice, where you're putting into practice some of what it is that you're reading. It's and I think that's where you go from just taking in information until that information actually is converted to a behavior, whether that behavior be a mental behavior just sort of internally, or a behavior in the world. Until information is converted to a behavior or practice, I don't think it actually has much impact. And so part of, Rob, I think the answer to your question is to begin putting into practice. And I know I'm a long way from where I'd like to be, but I have begun to do a little exercise, just a few physical exercises in the morning. I'm not sort of doing as much as I used to, physical activity, and it is crazy how difficult it is to put just a few minutes of exercise into my daily craziness. It seems like it would be really simple.
One of my favorite lines from one of my favorite nuns is Joan Chittister talks about how the rabbi asked the disciples, it's not that you have read the Torah, but has the Torah gone through you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
yep.
we can spend our whole lives reading theology, reading about prayer, reading about justice, reading about, and never actually allow it to transform us and to work within us. My great grandmother, she loved scripture, and at one point before she died, she said, I think it's actually now in me.
Yeah.
It's actually now in me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, one of the things you said, it's like, it's really easy to read lots and lots of books on prayer, and there are bunches of books on prayer, but until you start praying, all of those books will be worthless.
Rob, this is Jeff. I think a common thread there for me, I've been thinking about this, is our interconnectedness globally. This started back in maybe November, December, and all of a sudden come March, it's taken down the number one top economy in the in the world, the United States. But no, from a personal point of view, I know Jesus never said this literally, but I think of the three musketeers: one for all and all for one. We are a community. We reach out to Trinity, the homeless. We reach out and to the first responders. We need to think about our interconnectedness, because the food service person that maybe we drive by and get our food from, they're risking their lives. They're getting paid minimum wage. They might go home with corona, and their grandparents might get sick and pass away. So there are many heroes in this that during normal times we'd dismiss. Well, society says, well, if we pay minimum wage, that's all we can afford and stuff. But people globally need access to health systems. So all I'm saying is the times are teaching us that we are interconnected, and that one event on the other side of the world can knock us completely over. And our only strength is our community.
Well, and I think that's that piece about sort of talking about the Lord's Prayer. It's our Father. And I think of spirituality as very much an our practice rather than a my practice. And I think there are times to say my in a very intimate and personal way with God. But I think, Jeff, you're right in the sense that we need to realize our connectedness.
And the other part of that is people that don't have health care, that they're going to be carriers. The lesson there is, Jesus said, take care of the weakest and take care of everybody. And it doesn't matter whether it's one person one-on-one or 50 people helping one person. Those are our marching orders, and that's the only thing that protects us from a global pandemic.
Well, I think that's also where, for me, the measure of the greatness of a society is how well it takes care of the least amongst it. The people who, for whatever reason, can't take care of themselves, and how do we care for them? And rather than just how do we take care of ourselves. And I do think of the folks who are, say, working in the supermarkets and different things like that, and the essential services, hospitals, all the medical technicians, people, they are putting their life at risk for us. And hopefully, and this would almost come back to Rob's question, hopefully in the future we won't take some of that for granted like we maybe have in the past.
This is Kelly. I think in surreal times like this, there are opportunities to shift our perspective so that we see things in a way that might surprise us from what we're used to. I know seeing you, Rob, in worship this morning was just a bit bizarre for me to see one person in church.
Yeah.
But then I got to thinking about that altar rail that was behind you. And not just the people who I'm used to seeing come up to that altar rail on Sunday mornings, but everyone who's come up to that altar rail in the 70 some years that it's been there. Mm-hmm. So that all of a sudden you're not there alone, and I've got a connection not only to you, but to everyone who's ever worshiped in that space, mm-hmm. who I don't think about on a normal Sunday morning when all of us on this phone call are gathered there together.
Oh, hi, it's Jeannie. I just have to believe strongly that we all will be changed really for the good by all of this. And to share something personal, tomorrow is the anniversary date of when my mother passed away. And I feel deeply connected to her. And I think it's because I've had this time, this quiet time. I can't tell you, it's a beautiful thing. And I was kind of wondering if it would be a sad day or a sad time, but I'm just filled with the joy she had in her. And I'm very thankful for that. And it's so good to see everyone today.
Well, I think that's part of being aware of the timeless aspect or the eternal nature of your mother. And at that point, I think that's when that eternal quality actually holds on to both of us. And we can remember people who have gone before us with a sense of gratitude and love and almost immediacy, rather than with a sense of loss and anguish. Because the reality is, you haven't lost that. You still have it. So it's a cool thing.
This is Katie. I don't know if anyone has been hearing about the changes in the environment as a result of the coronavirus. The lagoons of Venice are filled with dolphins and swans. China has clear blue skies, and time. And there's a very interesting, I'd recommend this interesting op-ed piece in the New York Times called "What the Pandemic Means for Climate Change." But it ends up by saying it's tempting to think, oh, nature is recovering and nature is better without us. But we are a part of nature, and that hopefully when this is over, that we'll take stock of what the changes were while we were missing, as it were, and try for the better. So one of the things that you just have to look down to get the statistic is that it's likely that the lack of pollution in China will have saved the lives of 4,000 children under the age of 5 and 73,000 adults over the age of 70. Now, I mean, that's one person's opinion, but it's a complicated and mixed thing. I just hope that I can carry it with me. I often don't carry those lessons with me. And I'm hoping that the lessons I learned during this time, that I keep them. And as you say, I think that has a lot to do with feeling held by God and not holding on to the lessons, feeling held by the lessons. That's a different thing.
I just want to say one thing is, what part of what you're saying is this, and again, it comes back to this real interconnected, even the physical environment is connected, we're somehow connected. It's not just me and it, but it's like we together. I just do want to say that the Venice story is in part true, but part of it is actually made up. The dolphins haven't returned. That was made up. What has actually happened, though, apparently in Venice, is that because there aren't lots of boats roaring around with their propellers stirring up the soil or the bottom of, that the water has become clear and settled. But the piece about the dolphins actually apparently was someone's.
Check that out on Snopes.
Yeah, but I do think things like air pollution and what have you, obviously if people aren't driving their cars around, we're going to see at least a significant change, at least for a period of time. And it does really point, though, to that interconnectedness of all things. There is one creation, and we often act on it, when really we are acting as part of it and in it. And I think the way we care for the environment is also part of the way we care for ourselves, the way we care for our neighbors. So yeah, there's some really important lessons, I think, that we can glean from this whole situation. Well,
That's great. Can you hear me? I'm sorry. Okay, there we are. This is Joseph. I was just trying to find this prayer rapidly, and there might be another prayer book scholar on this call. In fact, I'm pretty sure there is. But there's that great line in one of the collects, which is, "Grant that we may never forget that our common life depends on each other's toil."
Yeah.
That's just, we would pray that at the monastery. And whenever I was the officiant and I was really having a bad day with the community, I would go, "And grant that I may never forget that our common life depends on each other's toil."
And maybe we could even translate it, never forget, to maybe we will always remember.
That our common life depends upon each other's toil.
Yeah. Well, I want to wish you all a really good week. Stay in touch by email, by telephone, telephone circles, different ways to connect. And I think as we get some of this technology figured out, to begin to ponder, I think, also, who are the dispossessed today in our society because their food, they've been cut off from their food source, for example, such as the homeless, and some of the work that Trinity's doing, and seeing how we can continue to be part of those ministries that I think will be more in need as this goes on. So have a great week, folks. Good to be with you. Take care. Yeah, big wave.
Thank you, Rob.
All right.
Bye to all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, Rob.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you and goodbye.